On this episode of Trees and Lines, we talked with Steve Hallmark. We talked with Steve about his experience and insights into the vegetation management industry and what kind of trends he sees going forward. Have a listen. Hope you enjoy.
Super excited. I'm with two of my favorite people in the industry. We welcome Steve Hallmark today. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Steve, of course, is a long-time legend of the industry and has very uniquely spent an incredible amount of time on the utility side and in the private sector, which is pretty unique. And we're gonna dive into a lot of different aspects of Steve's career and pick his brain on a bunch of different stuff today. So, Steve, man, really excited to have you here today. Maybe Steve, you could just kind of for our audience. Give a little background on, how your career started. I know you're a Texas kid, and that's where it all kicked off. But, kind of take us through the quick journey from Puget, SMUD, Phil Singer, all that stuff.
Graduated from Stephen F. Austin State University back in 1981. So it's been 41 and a half years now. So I unfortunately, during COVID, we didn't get to have a class reunion with our 40th anniversary of graduation. But all my buddies and cohorts still plan on doing that. But yeah, I spent my first 5 years working for what was then Gulf States Utilities, which is now part of the Entergy organization. From there, I'd left for a short time, I call it my sabbatical, to the private sector, working for one of the large line clearance contractors, but decided I really wanted, my heart was working for the utilities and in this industry. So I interviewed and was hired by John Goodfellow up at Puget Sound Energy. Back then, it was actually Puget Sound Power and Light. So moved there in 1989, and under John's tutelage, really did a crash course and really the present day of, I think, really kicked me into gear as to how I got really more and more involved in the industry, because John has also, throughout his career been such a big stalwart, with what we did. So spent 8 years up there. Kind of got tired of the wet, gray, long winters of Seattle and chose to move south to California, and was hired by it's the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and they had never had a professional manager running their program. They'd always been kind of, brought people up from within, but no one that had really spent time with managing a turnkey type program, which is what they wanted because of a lot of the legislation changes that were going on in the state of California. So I was brought down to help them set up their program, and did that and many other things while I was there in Sacramento. But really, just like I said, my really kickoff to really getting more involved in the industry and in different organizations and associations was working for John, and then obviously moving on from that and developing myself professionally. After I retired in 2018, I went into doing some private consulting. I was actually hired by a firm to working for the California State Governor's Office, overseeing PG&E's wildfire mitigation plan implementation. And that was very rewarding because I already knew a lot of the people that I was working with at PG&E, but really got to see the inside of how an investor-owned utility, because SMUD being a municipal, we operate under different requirements. So I got to spend a lot of time understanding how, on the IOU side, what their challenges are with dealing with the wildfire threats there in California and all the requirements they have to do now. So, and then someone kept knocking at my door, and in July I came over and joined Phil and Tej at Iapetus.
Yeah, I was definitely knocking at your door. That's for sure. I was bothering you for a while.
Tej, I'll tell you that Steve at SMUD was one of the very first utilities to be recognized as a Right of Way steward, and the only municipal utility.
Wait, yeah. Did that happen under Steve's sort of reign?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's correct.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I used to think preparing for NERC audits were going to be a challenge, but preparing for and getting going through the Right of Way Stewardship accreditation is, I think it's even a higher level. And I think once a utility has made that effort, they are to be greatly commended, because it's not a walk in the park. You just don't get anointed. Yeah, you don't get to write your check and get the plaque to hang on your wall. You got to prove yourself.
What was the decision by you and the SMUD leadership to pursue that Right of Way Stewardship, that accreditation?
Well, it really was my decision. I went to, to me, the cost was not this, it was pretty insignificant as far as what, it was more of the intensity of, dedicating the staff resources and going through the whole process of doing the accreditation. But, fortunately, SMUD is a utility that recognizes the importance of being recognized by your peers. I mean, they're the sixth largest municipal utility in the U.S. So it's not some little small podunk utility. They're the second largest in California, behind first being the larger one being LADWP. So fortunately, my peers and my superiors both felt like, they really cherished, especially when it's something that you have to go through a pretty good rigor to be accepted and acknowledge that you meet the criteria that Right of Way Stewardship does.
In our recent travels, I find that in talking with the modern day sort of vegetation leaders today, that there are executives out there that are excited about that accreditation, are discussing in terms of how to pursue it. So it definitely seems like it's catching some momentum even today. So very interested to see how that kind of plays out, if this becomes the industry standard, and we're going to see more than just 8 utilities secure that accreditation.
Hey, Steve, you mentioned you were at Puget and then you went to SMUD, and so from a manager standpoint, what's the difference between working within the IOU and the municipal environment?
With IOUs, you have a little more flexibility, being that anytime that you're dealing with a utility that's owned by either, in SMUD's case, it's actually it was formed under what California's MUD Act, which is the Municipal Utility District Act, which we aren't a part of the city of Sacramento. It's its own unique district that has an elected board that actually oversees the utility. So it was, in that case, you have to, very different in that working for an IOU, it's more of a private organization. You have much more flexibility oftentimes in some of your contracting and ability to, go out and recruit and bring in new companies, as an example. With a municipal utility, you have much more limited in those abilities. You have very kind of pretty small, tight lanes that you have to stay within. You can't just, you don't have the ability to always just say, hey, I want to hire this company. Well, if it's going to be over so much money, you've got to go out for bids, and you have some limitations. And so I think that was the biggest, when I went there, that was one of the biggest challenges for me from just the contracting perspective of there's ways that you can always have good contracts and bring in good quality companies. You just have a lot more rigors that you have to go through in order to be able to bring in, and make sure you write good specs. That's the one thing that really learned me is you really have to step your game up and make sure you have clear, concise specs so that you make sure that you get what you want as far as your contracting needs.
So was it always low bid? Is that?
It is. And fortunately, we're getting away. The industry is finding that, low bid is not, I think the industry as a whole is learning that going with low bid is not necessarily the answer. It's not just about saving money, because with low bid, sometimes the quality of the work can be extremely, substandard, and unless you have good controls in place to make sure that those types of companies don't come on your property and start working, low bid is not always the answer. And unfortunately, you put in good, you prerequisites as far as what you have to qualify to be able to bid, and then performance standards that you have to meet in order to stay on the property. And I think it's critical in the big shift that I saw in, say, the last 10 to 15 years over the course of my career.
Yeah, you still see people struggling with the idea of getting sourcing on board with that concept.
Yeah.
They still like low bid.
Oh, yeah, they do. But we've been able to, I think, more and more utilities I'm finding too, that they're learning that low bid isn't necessarily the right answer. You've got to put in some quality control. And sometimes you're going to pay a premium, but the end product is going to be superior to what you can accomplish by going with, just the guy that can do the work for the cheapest, especially when you're on the safety side of it, because oftentimes, with the low bid, unfortunately, what we've seen, or I saw over the course of my career, was that safety was one of the things that probably suffered when you dealt with, contractors that were trying to cut corners to make their to make money or even break even on the projects.
Well, it's good to see that more and more utilities are refusing to give on the safety side.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and that's a huge piece for me. What I saw at the beginning of my career, it was like there was really no focus on the safety by the contractors. It was like, make sure you got the bodies to staff the crews. We didn't care if they got hurt or not. And I say that honestly, and I think a lot of my contemporaries could probably say the same thing that they saw back in the early part of their careers in the, like I said, early 80s on my part. But over the course of my career, I saw a steady increase in how well, and in one of the big places I first saw it was with, working at Puget, and the emphasis that we placed on how safely the contractors, and, we would shut contractors down if they weren't safe. We would just fat to say, you have no place on this property if you can't perform in the safety arena. So there's another way that you've got to put good controls when you bring a new company in to understand how their safety performance is going to affect their work once they're on your property.
How would you advise folks who are kind of in the prime of their utility careers and are considering leaving the utility and moving to the private side? What is some guidance that you would offer them, given that you've actually lived on both sides of the fence?
Over the course of my career, it became more apparent that the need, as I got moved on and up within an organization, is to develop relationships and have people that I could turn to in, kind of like in confidence, but confidentially, about how to help, guide me and people that I looked up to and how they performed and how they were being successful, and to how to guide my career as I went. Because just, there's the, I think about this too, is there, the old saying about the Peter principle, about someone promotes until they get to a point where this person has no business to be in this role, because they are they're way over their head. And so you've got to be able to recognize, and sometimes someone that you have taken, that is taking you under their wing, they may be able to tell you, he says, I don't think that might be the best job career choice for you, because you're going to get that promotion, but are you going to be successful? That's what you got to help people understand, that as they want that job, okay, what's it going to look like to be successful? And what if you're not successful? Because if you're not, that's going to be a blemish on your career. And I think that's what I've seen that happen more often than not. They want that big promotion, they get it, they fail, and they struggle for a while, if they ever recover, actually.
Is there something that you obviously have had, a long career in the industry, done a lot of incredible things. Is there something that you think you left on the table where you're like, hey, maybe I ran out of time, or the industry wasn't ready to adopt X, Y, or Z, something that you wish that you could have implemented before you left kind of the utility side of the industry?
One of the things I've always and glad that I did was I didn't do it when I left Puget, because it was kind of not really a planned thing. It kind of just, and I always teased John about this, because he had gone back to one of the original trees and utilities conferences back when they were held at in Nebraska at the at the Arbor Day Foundation headquarters in Nebraska, and he came back from that and he brought me this job posting. He said, "Hey, you might want to share this with some of your folks that that work for you. They might be interested in going to Sacramento." And I looked at it and I said, "I'll do that." Well, guess what? I put in for that job and I got that job. But what I felt was important was when I left Sacramento is that my legacy is going to be how the program continues after I leave there. And I wanted to, I think that's kind of why at that point in time, the director that I was working for, he and I developed a plan and said, "Hey, I'm out of here in 2 to 3 years. Let's make sure that we get somebody." I don't do it, like me coming in here and having to learn the system. I'd rather get somebody in here that can work and understand for a few years under my guidance, and then go on to ultimately run the program. And that's how we ended up hiring, while I was still there, we hired Eric Brown to come in, and he ultimately, after I left, he ultimately is now the manager of the program there. So I guess that was, I think to me is critical, is sometimes when at that level, when corporations don't have kind of like a plan in place
like
for when they have a succession plan, exactly, of, okay, just like, and it can't be just the person that's been there the longest. I've seen that, it's okay, well, they're next in line. Well, shouldn't be the case. You may hurt some feelings, but you need to turn, the handing off of the gavel needs to be to the right person that can continue to build the program, because, you don't want it to go backwards. And sometimes I think programs do go backwards if they don't have the right succession plan in place.
It's interesting. You have, I think I met you in '89, probably when you first got to Puget, and known you a long time.
Yeah, Phil worked for me back then. Yep.
Unbelievable.
To be successful, you had to manage staffs at both Puget and, but I'm guessing success doesn't come from managing your staff as much as managing your manager.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. But I learned this early on. I had to do two things, because I was hired in as just a regular division forester by John. And then after I'd been there not quite a year, John was promoted into a different position, and I was named his replacement. So, I came in and other people that had been there much longer than I, weren't selected. Whereas I was selected to replace John in his role. Fortunately, he still was at the utility, so I had him to lean on. But that was my first big promotion, where I had to learn, okay, I've got to let go of the reins on that side of the business and let people do their job and help them be successful. And I struggled with that for about the first 6 months of that. I always wanted to go back and kind of mess with in the guy's business that replaced me out in the field. And finally he had told me one time, he said, "Hey, you just need to go do your job and let me do my job. And then if I'm not doing my job, we'll have a discussion, but just let hands off." I said, "Oh, I understand that now." So I think that's the first step. You've got to learn how to, step back and be more strategic in your thinking and how you manage, and not be so operationally inclined. But then the big thing for me, and most all of my staff, especially there, were from a vegetation forester or, biologist, that type of a background. We foresters tend to think different than engineers and accountants. And let's face it, utilities are run by engineers and accountants, and they understand numbers, and they're very, we foresters tend to be a little more abstract in their thinking, and they have to think more, have critical thinking to be able to manage and sell themselves and their ideas up to the people that they're working for, and understand how to deal with those, the accountants and the engineers of the corporations. And I think the ones that do are the ones that are successful.
There's lots of technology now. There's, programs have evolved. There's people using new innovative approaches to how they think about vegetation management. There's more dollars. The utility is, earmarking for this type of work. Where do you think we are in the life cycle of this industry? Are we in a good place? Are we regressing? Like, where are we?
I kind of get the feel in talking with my contemporaries back out in the industry, that there's just so much technology is being thrown at them as we're the next best thing to help you solve all your problems. And I think they're just overwhelmed at times because there's so much stuff out there and they don't honestly know what to believe. And I think they're sometimes sold bills of goods which don't deliver, and they become very frustrated with that. And I think also sometimes, once you say, okay, I want this solution, the time that it takes to actually implement that solution doesn't happen overnight.
I've heard a similar sort of narrative, and maybe that's just the iterative process. Like, it's exciting. People took a first bite. There was some things that were real. There were some things that were not real. And the industry is kind of going through its second, third iteration of like figuring out, what's going to be important and what isn't. No, I see that as well. Very good. Okay. Well, Steve, before we kind of get out of here, I gotta ask you some questions about, something I learned about you on a personal level, which I think is fascinating, is you and your wife's passion for kind of riding horses, like doing kind of the long rides, that kind of thing. So tell us, A, how in the world did you get into that? And B, where did you get into it?
Well, my wife was already into horses when we got married, and we had moved to Washington. We moved to Washington a year after we got married, and she brought her. She had a thoroughbred that she had bred, and then so it was brought up later by our friends that had bred her for her, and my wife had gotten introduced to she liked to fox hunt, and there is actually it's the oldest fox hunting club, which is a sport involving horses chasing fox with foxhounds through the woods. Well, the oldest recognized fox hunt in the west of the Mississippi is located just outside of Tacoma, Washington. So she had gone to see this fox hunt, got introduced to some people that did endurance. And went over to their house one night for dinner, and they got a phone call, said, "Hey, I got this horse I need to get rid of." And at the time I didn't have one. So they said, "He just doesn't get along with my horses. We need to get him out of here." So we went over there and looked at him that night and said, "Well, hell, we'll take him." Of course, I think back then that's when you're kind of young and not necessarily thinking in the right things. But it was a big what's called a spotted Appaloosa, and or a leopard Appaloosa. He's white with liver killer spots all over him. And he and I started endurance riding. And then when we moved to California, that's the mecca for endurance riding in the U.S. That's really where the sport started. And I got involved in it doing, much more endurance riding down there. We'd done some in Washington, but then got involved in doing it's a famous race that starts up by Lake Tahoe and ends in Auburn, California. And it's 100 miles over that you have to complete. Basically, you start, over the Sierras, and you have 24 hours to complete it. So I've got 2 completions on that. So
incredible.
I think the body's a little too old now to keep doing that stuff. So it's much more shorter rides now. We don't do the 100 milers anymore.
I'm not sure about looking for a cantankerous horse as the quality you look for in the first one.
No, Well, I tell you what, those ones teach you a lot, though. I said, okay, if I can get through this guy, I can get through just about anything.
Well, Steve, it was a great conversation, great catching up with you. I'm glad you were able to share some insights with us from your long, very successful career in the space. So thanks for being with us today, my friend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. And, obviously, it's been a real pleasure getting to reconnect. And now, Phil and I were often on the other, opposite sides of the table for years, either, as working for me or as a UA executive director, but now getting to work with Phil, and we, it's as well as with you, Tej. It's been, it's been a pure joy.
Yeah, it's been a pure joy. And there's nothing better for me than sharing a beer with you guys and just listening to the stories. You're talking about 81. I was like 4. So I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Trees and Lines, sponsored by Iapetus Holdings, LLC. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. If you have any questions, or if you have ideas for future episodes, please contact us at treesandlines@iapetusllc.com.